Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Astro, AWANI, for having me here.
I'd like to begin, if I may, with, I guess, situating Bhutan in terms of global development. Help us understand where Bhutan sits in terms of the global development. Is it a developing country? How far has it come along? I understand democracy is about slightly more than a decade old in
Indeed,
Bhutan.
Yes. Bhutan was once upon a time referred to as the last Shangri-La. Yes, but it is a historical, geographical reality situated up in the Himalayas. We call our country the jewel of the Himalayas, Bhutan. The national language describes Bhutan as Drukyul. It was also called Menjong, the land of medicinal herbs. Sits in the north of India, in the south of the Tibetan Autonomous Region of China. A small country, 150 kilometers north-south and 300 kilometers east-west.
It's like the size of Switzerland, if I'm not mistaken.
I would think so,
oh,
yes.
Wow, okay, all right. And as mountainous.
Yes, indeed.
And if I could interject, it was also, I think, very famous for people who traveled, and I know you're a well-traveled man within your own country. That's as part of your tagline, as it were. It was a country that wasn't as accessible to global tourism. It's something that people will talk about, that you would have to apply or wait for years to get a visa into Bhutan. Of course, that's all changed. And could you help us understand this change? Why is it that Bhutan sought to open its doors and to even change internally? What was the impetus for that?
Bhutan is, in fact, a very ancient country. It's an old country dating back to several centuries into history. And for many years, till about the middle of the last century, Bhutan remained in what we call self-imposed isolation. Didn't really have much interaction with the world beyond. It was a difficult policy, but it was a wise policy. Our kings ensured that Bhutan remained an independent country, a sovereign country, pursuing our own way of life and developing our own worldview. So for a long time we remained in a kind of self-chosen isolation. But somewhere in the middle of the last century, when the world around was trying to reconfigure itself after the Second World War and the Britishers left India, there is also the time when Bhutan's third king, His Majesty Gyalpo Jigme Dorje Wangchuk, thought that Bhutan would have to look around and look beyond, and it started, Bhutan started opening up. And now we are a member of many international organizations, including the United Nations Organization, and following its own unique development path, otherwise called gross national happiness.
And that is unique in itself, right? So you chose to use this economic measure as opposed to what's more commonly accepted, the GDP, the gross development ratio, so percentage. So explain to us, how do you measure the gross national happiness in terms of, as an economic indicator? What are the pillars that make up this index?
We believe that every nation ought to have its own North Star, as indeed every individual man, woman and child ought to have their own dream. So for Bhutan, the North Star was identified by our fourth king, His Majesty Gyalpo Jigme Wangchuk. He was very young when he became king, in his teens. But as young as he was in his body, he was very wise, has been very wise and visionary as a king. He led Bhutan and brought it right to the 21st century. His Majesty looked around as a young king to see as to how Bhutan's development, Bhutan's progress may be seen. A lot of people around the world, in fact most countries around the world, use the conventional economics-based, materials-determined yardstick called gross domestic product.
Oh yes, sorry, yes.
However, gross domestic product tells only a part of the story of development. It doesn't tell the full story. In life, we need not only material well-being, but there are also multiple levels, multiple elements that make us who we are. But GDP does not look into these non-economic, non-material dimensions of our life. And it also doesn't go beyond economics when it looks at societal development, societal progress. So His Majesty the Fourth King decided that for Bhutan, we have to adopt a much more holistic, a better integrated, broader-based development path, and he gave the name Gross National Happiness.
All right, we have just 1 minute before we go to a break. How much of that conversation was dispersed in society? How much of it is an elite-driven agenda versus a popular agenda? People feeling that they wanted, as you say, a North Star, a moral compass that was different from the rest of the world.
In Bhutan, we revere our king. The institution of the monarchy is extremely important for Bhutan. It is the principle of national cohesion, monarchy. It is the principle of national unity. So we meet in the king, and the king speaks for the nation as a whole. The king, the position of the king, His Majesty, the king's position as the monarch of the country is one of a unifier. We look up to the king as a symbol of national unity. So for the Bhutanese people, the presence and the role of His Majesty the King is extremely important as a guide and as somebody who provides the moral direction for the country. The actual governance of the country is done by an elected government. His Majesty is the head of state, represents the country as a symbol of our nationhood. So it is not so much of a question of the people having to really come to terms with the institution of monarchy. The institution of monarchy is a reality. It is a felt experience, and the institution is deeply revered by the people. Political parties and governments will come and go, yes, with changes in time. But beyond the vagaries of politics and populist movements, the institution of monarchy will continue as the stabilizing force, as a force of unity, stability, and continuity for the Kingdom of Bhutan.
Okay, we're going to continue our look at the Kingdom of Bhutan after this on Consider This, so stay tuned. Welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, with me Sharaad Kutan, and on the show today we have the former Education Minister of the Kingdom of Bhutan. We have with us Thakur S. Paudial. Now, we were just going to get into this before the break, but we are curious to know your personal journey. I mean, how did you end up becoming the Education Minister from 2008 to 2013?
I'm a village boy, born and brought up in a remote village called Dorokha in southwest Bhutan. Went to my village school initially and moved on to the district school, went to India to do my further studies, and joined the education ministry. In my time, graduates coming from universities had a lot of options. There were more job opportunities, openings. Then there were a number of people who had to actually take these important responsibilities up. So in my time, there were just 30 graduates in the country. So we could pick and choose any ministry in the government. However, I decided to be a teacher. I decided to be an educator. And to this day, I'm so grateful that I made that decision.
And why? Well, what is it about teaching that attracts you?
You know, Teaching is something that you cannot take as a job or employment. You have to feel that it depends upon your passion, your convictions. You have to believe that education is important and follow that light. And education is so very important for societies, for individuals, institutions, and for the country. Any nation that does well does so thanks to education. Education succeeding, no nation can fail. Education failing, no nation can succeed. So when I became, when the people entrusted that responsibility of looking after the education system in the country, it was actually a continuation of my role as a teacher. The only difference was that the size of my classroom became much wider to cover the whole country.
So you're also known as the most widely foot-traveled education minister in the world. What does that mean? That means you were traveling across the country on foot to visit schools, or?
I think some of my colleagues have been very kind to attribute that, that honor, I must say, on me. Bhutan is a small country, but once you start walking, it expands, it becomes big. And to get from one point to another takes a long, long time. And many of our schools are located in very remote hamlets, in distant places. And it was important for me to travel to these schools, meet my fellow teachers, meet the children, their parents, the community. I owed it to them to visit them and to see how they lived and how they worked. So it was a deeply educative and insightful journey for me. I wouldn't travel outside the country so much as the education minister. I would ask my colleagues to do the job of traveling as much as they could. But I would travel inside the country.
Within the country.
Yes. It was important for me to know the realities of our school.
Right, so you were encountering a reality and learning from that experience. But what about the models you brought to it? I mean, from a pedagogical point of view, what have you been influenced by? Are you looking around the world for ways of thinking about education? And did you use that to apply to the Bhutan context?
There is so much going on around the world in the name of education, but not all of it is education. So today's education addresses mostly the claims of the mind, the claims of the intellect. But the mind or the intellect is not the end all and be all of education. There are so many other elements that make us who we are, that make the children who they are. So when we collect the most precious segment of the population of the society, that is the children, young men and women, in our schools, colleges, and universities, and keep them there for extended periods of time, education has got to be purposeful, it's got to be worthwhile, meaningful. So, as much as we were looking around the world for good models, we also had to look deep into ourselves. We had to look into the soul of education. Long ago, some great minds described education as the noble sector. It had to be the noble sector. No other sector of public service has ever been called the noble sector, but education was. Education is actually dedicated to helping young men and women, boys and girls, cultivate the nobility of their mind, cultivate the nobility of their heart, thereby leading to cultivate the nobility of action. So when the head and the heart and the hands are aligned properly and nobly, the result of such educational efforts would be preparation of young men and women who will be good citizens, who will be good individuals, and who will serve the society and the nation and the world well. So that is something that we were doing, looking into education from its deep core.
So when you look at policy making for education, how do you do that through the filter of the gross national happiness perspective? How do you make sure that education policy is in line to the pillars of that, the sustainability through preservation of culture, through making sure that societal development is equitable? How do you filter that educational guideline in that mold?
Oh, that's so very important. I was talking about the North Star. And if a nation has a North Star, the subsystems of the nation will have to follow the North Star as well. And education is an extremely important subsystem of any nation. So the Ministry of Education in Bhutan had to embrace this responsibility of doing its part to advance the goals of the country, gross national happiness goals. Gross national happiness as a development architecture, development vision, is founded on 4 important comprehensive pillars: equitable and balanced socio-economic development, preservation of our culture and tradition, conservation of our natural environment, and promotion of good governance. And we have what is called the Planning Commission. It was called the Planning Commission erstwhile. Erstwhile it was called the Planning Commission. The same Planning Commission has now been renamed as the Gross National Happiness Commission. And this commission has to do the same job as any other planning commission does. Do the policy making and preparation of plans, mobilizing resources, allocation of resources, and also monitoring. So all the government departments and the ministries preparing the annual and the 5-year plans would have to submit their programs and plans to this Planning Commission. And the Planning Commission, the Gross National Happiness Commission, vets all the projects.
It has to make sure everything is in line with that.
Yes, it has to, yes. And if there's any program that is incompatible with the principles of gross national happiness, they will be rejected and they will not get state funding. Yeah. So they have to be revised and submitted to the Planning Commission, Gross National Happiness Commission. And if the Planning Commission is satisfied that they meet the guidelines, the principles of GNH, then they get approved and receive state funding. Education is within that broad, yes, umbrella.
We'll find out a little bit more the concrete elements of this after this right here on the show. So stay with us. We'll be right back in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, with me Sharaad Kutan, and on the show, the former Minister of Education for the Kingdom of Bhutan, Thakur S. Paudiel, joined us on the show. Sharaad, you had a question.
Yeah, you know, many of us, at least in this part of the world, in Southeast Asia, are very concerned about youth unemployment and employability, and that seems to be one of the goals, aligning the education system with the market. Yeah. Is that something that the Bhutan government is concerned about?
I think countries around the world are facing that challenge, and Bhutan is no exception. However, I have to emphasize the fact that today a lot of the employing agencies are shifting the responsibility to our young people. They have very cleverly changed the terminology from employment to employability. Employment attributes the responsibility to the employers. But when you talk about employability, you shift the responsibility to our young men and women, graduates of our schools, colleges, and universities. So it is important for employing agencies, companies, corporations, whosoever they are, including the government, to prepare young people for those jobs that they have with them. When the young people come to our schools and colleges and universities, it is not simply to prepare themselves for careers, as important as it is, not only for jobs, as important as they are. It is to prepare them to be good human beings, to be conscientious citizens, to be good citizens of the society and indeed of the world. So when people talk about young people not being employable or having employable skills, I think it's a bit unfair. However, it is also the responsibility of our institutions of learning to prepare young people with those important skills and attributes, skills that will take them through in their life, but at the same time leading good, meaningful, productive lives. So employability is important, but at the same time creating employment is equally important. So in Bhutan, we do have a certain level of educated unemployment. It is an indication of the fact that I guess we have done rather too well in educating all our people. So in the past, there would be more jobs and fewer people looking for employment. Now we have more people who are educated, but the jobs, of course, they are increasing, but often young people do not get the kind of job that they want to take up.
Is it creating frustration?
Oh, there will be some element of frustration in young people all over. So
Bhutan is a generally young population.
oh yes, indeed.
Okay,
So,
right.
yes, and of course, now in my time, not everybody would go to school, but today, every single family would make sure that every single child in the family gets to school, to college.
Both boys and girls?
Oh yes, indeed, yes. So that's why the number of young people who graduate from schools and colleges and universities is now expanding. There are jobs available, but often what happens is that the jobs that are available may not be appealing enough to young people. And what the young people come up with could be attributes and skills that may not be immediately used or by employing agencies. So what ought to happen is bring about a kind of a balance between the aspirations of young people and the impulses that the market throws out. Yes.
So I just want to go back very quickly to something you mentioned earlier about how everything, all policy has to be in line with the GNH. Yes.
Oh, yes.
So in your, I guess, experience looking at other countries and their curriculum, what is different about Bhutan specifically in what you're teaching your children in the classrooms?
In pursuit of gross national happiness as our national vision, we decided in the Ministry of Education that our curriculum, our teacher preparation efforts, and the way we organize ourselves would have to be in a proper alignment with that big national goal. So what we did in 2009 was introduce a big national reform initiative in education. We called it Educating for Gross National Happiness. And that big program of Educating for Gross National Happiness was to be implemented through a strategy that we called Green Schools. And Green Schools as a means to an end, and the end was to be Green Bhutan. So nurturing green schools for Green Bhutan was the strategy. And green is an
ecological. Is that what the
it's
green?
It's more than ecological greenery. In our term, in our understanding, green is a color. It refers to nature and the environment, but green is also a metaphor. It is a metaphor for life. It is a metaphor for anything and everything that supports and sustains life. And by life we mean human life, animal life, bird life, plant life, life in all its multiple variety, multiple forms. So anything that supports life in its multiplicity is green. So we can have green schools, we can have green media, we can have a green parliament, green politics, green economics, green courts, green homes, green minds, green hearts, green actions. So green is anything that supports life. So why not education? We're talking about environment today, global warming, climate change. We're talking about the society, we're talking about the world, and we're talking about the sustainability of planet Earth today. So green has got to do, green has everything to do with the sustainability of life, sustainability of our societies, sustainability of our planet Earth. That is green.
Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time, Padwal. Thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you very much indeed for having me here.
I'm Melisa Idris, with me Sharaad Kutan. We will be back for another episode of Consider This, same time tomorrow. Catch us then. Thank you.